customize a lot of these templates is using motion. But the question I had was, how can I create an animated map using motion? So we're going to actually create that map here. I'm going to close this project. I'm going to close out of Final Cut. Done with that here. And we're going to create a new motion project. So when you go up to the File menu, you have an option for New, and it'll bring up usually the project browser, which is this one there. And if you're new to motion, the way it works, you have a whole bunch of collections on the left side you can select from. But in most cases, I like to start with a blank project. If you're designing an effect, a transition, a generator, a title, any of those for Final Cut, you can select the template. But we'll start with just a motion project. We just want to build an animated map, so we're going to do that right here inside of a standard motion project. On the right side, we see our presets. Similar to creating a Final Cut project, you can select the frame size that you want to use. You can also go down to custom, and you'll get the options to enter in exactly the frame size you want to use. In this case, I know I'm creating this for someone who's got some pretty high quality footage, so I'm actually going to create a 4K project. Ultra HD, I can see at the bottom here, it puts in my resolution for that project. The frame rate, however, they're not using a high frame rate, they're just going to use the 30 frames per second. And then I see my duration for the project. Right now it's set to 10 seconds. You can change this if you want to any time. I'm going to actually do this animation over a 5-second period of time, so I'm going to set it to 5 seconds as the default here. You can certainly change that after the fact. Then I'll hit return, and that creates my project. And with motion, what I always do is the first step is I click here in the viewer and I hit Shift Z. If you know from Final Cut, Shift Z fits the viewer into the actual viewer here so I could see the whole view, which had to shrink it down to 55% instead of at 100. Okay, so here's my project. Unlike Final Cut, there's no autosave being built in. You do have to remember to save your projects here in Motion. So get back into the habit if you've gotten out of it. Make sure you use Command S to go and save your project. And in this case, haven't saved it yet, so it brings up the dialog. I'm just going to save it on the desktop, and I'm going to call it my map. And if you hit save, it'll save it. If you wanted to, you can have it also collect all the media into the project, which I actually do want to copy it to a folder, and I'll hit save. Okay, cool. So we have our blank canvas here. There's nothing on it. I can even go up to the top right here and change it to a transparent canvas, which we can see checkerboard means it's transparent, so it's going to look right through it. So there's a couple things that we want to do. We want to animate directions on a map. And that's going to start with the map. We need to get an actual map. So I'm going to do that using Google Maps. And I believe we can do this as long as we give credit to Google. I believe I was reading in their terms that you can do that. So I'm going to go to Google Maps. Let me bring it over on so you can see this. And then here we have our map. Let's zoom way out and see where we're going. We're going in Hollywood. I have some family, we'll say, coming in. They're going to be staying at one of the hotels here, and we want to give them a little animated maps for directions. So let's see, where are they staying? Let's say they're staying over here at the Sunset Gower Studios, and they're going to be going up to the Magic Castle for a show. So I'm going to zoom out one step here. This will be our map that we get. You can certainly go through and customize the way that the map looks, but this is the map I want to use. So to use it, I'm going to use Shift Command 4 to take a screenshot. I'm going to hit the space bar because I want this entire window, and I'll just click on it to get that saved in there. The other thing I want to do, I'm going to move this so that it's right here, and you'll see what I'm doing here in just a second, because I want at the lower center here, there's the Google logo. I want to make sure that Google gets credit for the map, so I'm going to take a screenshot of Google down there, but I wanted a solid gray background, so I moved the map so that that was there. And then I also want to make sure that it says map data, copyright Google, so I'm going to take a little screenshot of this area. We don't need the terms. We'll keep the location for US in there. And as I'm doing this with Shift Command 4, it's taking those screenshots. You might have noticed in the lower right corner, it's putting them up there for a second and then saving them. That's a Mojave feature, but it saved all of those onto the desktop. Cool. So I have my map images created. So I'm going to close out of this window. I'm going to go into a new Finder window. Oops, not a new motion window. Go into a new Finder window. I'm going to go Shift-Command-D to get to my desktop. There's my 3 screenshots. I'll just select them all and drag them into Motion. Okay, so that's our first step here. I have the 3 screenshots. I'm going to start with my map view back here. I'm going to go into the inspector under properties, and I'm going to change my scale up here to adjust the size of the map. So I'm trying to make it easy for them to see everything. And I know they're going from we're going to say the Sunset Gower Studios down here. They're going to be starting there, and they're going to probably walk up over on Hollywood Boulevard, and then they're going to get up eventually to the Magic Castle. So we'll have them going through there. We're going to, it's a little far. They're gonna take a taxi instead. We're not gonna have them walk. So I'll double click in the layers section here and just call this the map. On the right side, I'm gonna lock the layer because I like where this layer is. That way I don't accidentally move it. And then I have my Google option here, which unfortunately has my arrow on it. So let me switch back to Google Maps. I don't like the arrow. So let me show you what I'm doing here. And we're going to move this way over here. There's my Google. I'm going to do Shift-Command-4. Grab just the Google logo. There we go. Now I'll close the map. I'll switch back to the Finder. Bring in, there it is. Bring in my Google logo. Okay, cool. So now I have the Google logo here, so I can just drag this down and make sure that that's listed on the map so that we're giving credit there to Google. So that they are okay there. I could do the same thing with my map data copyright. I can drag that down into the corner. Okay, cool. So I've gotten my credit there to Google. I'm going to lock this map layer group. Actually, let me unlock it because this is going to be the map group. Now I can lock it. I can close it. We have our map, right? So that's the first step. We want to create the map and be able to get all of that information there with it. Next, we want to go in and add essentially the path that we're going to take in for this map. So for this one, there's a bunch of tools built into Motion, and I'm going to use the Bezier tool, which as you get more into motion graphics and design, these are great tools to understand and use. If you're used to Photoshop or another app, you might have used these tools. And we're going to add some points on here to create this path. So I'm just clicking in my canvas. You might notice nothing's happening right now because I actually need to create a new group for this to go into. And I'm going to call this group path. And that was because my maps group was locked. It wasn't allowing me to add it. So we'll go back to Bezier tool. And I'm going to click. We're going to go up to Sunset Boulevard. We'll go over on Sunset. Go up to Hollywood. Now let's go all the way up. Which I'm going to go up to Yucca Street. You'll notice there's a curve here on the street. So I can actually, on my next point, click and drag. And I get my Bezier handles, which allow me to create a little bit of a curved path. I'll then hold Option and drag this handle over because we're going to take a left turn on Franklin here. And that's going to take me right over to the Magic Castle. So I have my path here. I'm going to hit Return or Enter, and that creates the path. Obviously, this path is ugly and not a line or anything like that, but you'll notice in the inspector, under the shape inspector, I get a fill option and an outline. I don't need a fill, so I'll uncheck that. And then my outline here is the path itself. So I'm going to make it just a black line. I'm going to increase the width, and there we get our little path line, right, happening. If I wanted it to be a dotted line, I could definitely change this to airbrush, and I could change the width. Still with that, I have the spacing option, which as I increase that means there's more space in between each of these dots. I can go over to the brush profile and shrink down my white color here. That's taking away some of the white spots and the kind of the airbrushness out of those circles, which maybe then after doing that, I want to change the width and the spacing with each of these to be some kind of a little dot there. Okay, and all these things, I mean, Motion has so many controls, so there's a lot of customization that you can do with all these. So don't hesitate to go in here and play with those and adjust those and create a path that you actually want to see. So now with this, I love this dotted line, but I want it to actually animate onto the screen as if we're moving across that path. So there are behaviors built in that you can go in and do, and you can definitely go into this. There's actually one under shape called right on, And if you think of this like actually writing on paper, you're writing on the path. And if I scrub across the project, notice that little dotted line goes across the map there. It gives us a little animation of writing onto it. So definitely something you can do as a way to animate those. The other option is to use keyframes, and we're going to see that in the next part of this, because I really like the animated line. Looks good. But just to add some more to this, and what the original person was asking for, the video they wanted to recreate was actually to have a little animated taxi going across this line. So I like it. I'm going to lock the path. I'm going to create a new group, hit return, call this group taxi. And I actually have a taxi picture on the desktop from a royalty-free site, so we're able to reuse this and not have to pay any rights to it, which is great. So here's my taxi picture. Obviously, it's not just the taxi itself. So what I'm going to do is hit the Z key to enable my zoom tool, just like you could do with Final Cut. Hit the H tool for the hand tool, center this over here. Okay, and then with the taxi selected, there's a mask button down here at the bottom of motion, and I can actually draw a Bezier mask around this taxi. And this is something that if we're just clicking, does a straight line, but if you saw with the path on the street, I can also click and drag, and then it'll create a curved line. Out of anything, if you can get really good at drawing these masks, you can save yourself a lot of time. So I do also want to keep the little shadow in this mask, so I'll do that. And I'm not being too precise because you don't want to just sit here and watch me make all these points. So hopefully you get the idea and you can spend the time. This is one of the time-consuming parts of motion graphics, is being very specific with all these paths that you create. But that's going to be what changes it from being just kind of a rough path to something that looks really, really good. So as you go through, another feature of the path here is if you hold the Option key down, you can actually add points. So if you missed a spot, you can certainly add those points in later on. You can also right-click or control-click on a point, and you have an option to change this from linear to smooth. Smooth is where it has these handles. Linear is just a straight, essentially just from this point on, it's just going straight to that next point, and there's no curve or anything. So this looks pretty good. I've cropped into it. However, I may also want to crop out the windows that are there. So I'm going to select the whole group here, go into my Bezier mask again, and we'll go in and crop out a window because that shouldn't be there. Almost, if I close it. There we go. And actually, we want this underneath the taxi, not the other group there. So let me do. Let's move this over right under there. Okay. And why am I not seeing my mask? I think. Let's see if we group this one and put the mask on that group. There we go. And then we'll do. Oh no. I'm sorry. Right now it's trying to crop into this one. So we actually want these masks to mix together. So with this mask selected in the mask inspector, there's a couple options that you have here, but we want the mask blend mode to be subtract. Right? Subtract? Or is it add for both of them? Preserve scale, invert mask. So we want to add that, but we want to subtract this one. And we'll invert the masks. Okay, well, let's see if we go up. Not inverted. Okay. All right, sorry about that. This could be kind of confusing in your layering and everything. So let me show you another window. I'm not going to do every window here, but let me show you another one. So with the taxi layer selected, we go down to the Bezier mask. We're going to click on our points here to mask out our window. And with the mask selected, you're going to go over to your blend mode or mask mode type for it and select subtract. And what that's doing is essentially you're punching a hole through this area and subtracting that area of it. If I uncheck the map in the background, notice now we have that checkerboard there. So again, taxi selected, hit the Bezier mask tool, and you can use any of these mask tools. You could do a freehand mask, for example, and then just click and drag around. I like the points because this car is a very specific shape, but maybe you're drawing out a person or something else, so maybe a freehand mask is easier to use. And then with that mask selected, just say mask blend mode, change it to subtract, and then it punches the hole through that window, and you could certainly go back and adjust the mask and change that. Okay, so you could go through and do that for all the little points and little areas just to be very specific about this. Again, that's being almost over specific with this because you're barely even going to see those windows. But attention to detail, it's important. I think it's really important. And that's something, for example, we can select this mask and we can go to our feather. We could feather the edges just a little bit, might make it look a little smoother. A lot of things you can do with motion. So there's our little taxi there, and it doesn't look too bad. I'm going to shrink them way down because I want it to be on the path there. I'll bring the map back up so we can see that. The taxi is facing the wrong way, though, because what we're going to do is have this taxi kind of drive along the path up until it gets to our magic castle there, our destination. So I need to flip this around. So with the taxi selected, you can go up to filters, if I remember correctly. And we have a distortion option called flop, which is kind of like invert. So it's moving it over. So now the front of the little taxi bus here is on the left instead of the right. So we just flop that over. And filters are a way to filter through or add kind of some visual changes to your layers that you have selected. And then behaviors is how you can actually do animation. So we did a behavior earlier to our path to do the right on behavior, and that's what the little gear is. But that's what a behavior is inside of motion. Okay, and now to actually animate where this little taxi's going across the line, to make this easier, I have to do all this with the timeline down at the bottom. And on the right side here, I'm going to hide the audio part of it. I just need the video. And my taxi's starting at frame 65. I don't want that. I want it to be all the way to the start of it. So I'm going to drag this over to the start of the project. That way the taxi's always there. And then going over to the beginning of the project, playhead, very important that you're at the beginning, and you can choose either of these. We're going to turn on the record animation button, which I'm not a fan that this is the shortcut, but if you press the letter A, that enables recording, which means any motion, any changes you make here in the viewer, keyframes are going to be recorded. So I don't like that the shortcut A is to enable and disable that because it's very easy to accidentally enable recording and then you can mess everything up. So just be careful with that. And in Final Cut, A is to get your arrow and select tool, which is extremely common to do. So that's some things on there. But anyway, we want our recording to be turned on because we do want it to record the changes that we make with this bus. So I know the bus is going to start down here at the Gower Studios. So I'm going to start it down here as if it's going down the street, or in this case up, because that's how the video is labeled. And I'll position it where it needs to go. But I'm also going to add a keyframe with rotation, which I can see it did here, position and rotation. That's the only things I'm changing. So I'm verifying that those both have keyframes. It looks good. So now let me hit the ZT key in the hand. I want to zoom into this area so you can see what we're doing. And then I'm going to do Shift S to go to the arrow tool instead of A. So now if we drag the playhead down a little bit, I can see the path is starting to be drawn on the screen. So I'm going to drag it right to where it gets to that corner. And I'm going to move this bus or this taxi here up to the corner. And I just moved it up and over a little bit. So all it did is added a position keyframe. But I know I'm animating rotation. So because I'm animating rotation, I'm going to add a keyframe to rotation. And this looks good. I don't want the bus to turn yet. I'm going to have it turn on the next over the next couple ones. So that looks good. And then we'll have it go down here. And now I want it to rotate. So I'm going to rotate, or move it. Let's move it over here. And then we'll rotate it over. Because I changed both the position and the rotation, you can see it added keyframes for both of those parameters. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit my ZT tool to enable zoom. I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to click and drag. By holding Option, I'm zooming out. I can hit the hand tool to move this down a little bit, and then I'm going to hit Shift S to go back to my selector arrow tool. And then we'll drag this down. Just actually, let me go back and show you that. So now I can see it's kind of turning across the Gower Street or the intersection there. So then we'll go down. I can see the path is just a straight line up until we get to Highland. So I'll say right before we get to Highland, I'm going to drag it over now. And because we have record on, it moves it over. It adds a keyframe. But I didn't rotate it, so there's no rotation keyframe. So I'm going to make sure I hit the plus there to add that keyframe. I'm going to hold down the letter H to get my hand tool just to move this over a little bit. And again, the hand tool is not moving any object. I'm not moving the map. If I do Shift Z and zoom out, all that the hand tool is doing is moving what I'm seeing in the viewer here. So let's go back, zoom in, and there we go, and then Shift S to move back over. So now, move a couple frames over to where that dot is around the turn, which is probably about there. And I'm going to go in and move it up a little bit and do the rotation as well. Rotate it. I want it kind of up, so we'll do it right about there. Okay, cool. So that should be fine. Looking over here, I can see both position and rotation have keyframes. So now we can move now to the next point, which I can't see. So I'm going to use the hand tool, move up a little bit. And we're going to see, we get to this little tiny turn on the map. So I'm going to go up to about Yucca Street there. And Shift S to go back to my select tool. Drag this up. And right about there. And again, I didn't rotate it, but I do want to add a rotation keyframe. So I'm going to do that here in the inspector. We'll then move a little bit further down in time, right till it gets to the intersection. We'll move it up to there, and actually we'll even start rotating it. Actually, no, we want it to rotate this way because it's kind of going around the turn. Go a couple frames to the right here, move it over, rotate it. You can see how tedious this is, but this is motion graphics work. Then we'll go down to the end of the project here where we get to the Magic Castle, our destination there. And just for the fun of it, just in case I wanted to do more work later, I'm going to add the keyframe for rotation just so we have all of that. Okay, cool. So let me show you what we have here. I'm going to click in the canvas here, do Shift Z to zoom out, go back to the beginning. I'm going to do Command R. Command R renders a RAM preview, which will make things a lot smoother when we're going through. And I'll hit the space bar to play this. Notice the bus goes. When it gets to the turns, maybe a little bit strange as far as the animation. You might want to refine those. For example, especially on this rotation here, it kind of makes a weird turn. So I could select the taxi, hit the Z key to zoom in, and looking at my keyframes here, I can see there's some weird turns. So I'll select this one. I can do Option Drag to adjust that Bezier handle. If I don't hold Option, notice it moves both of them. But if I hold Option, I can move just the left side up here. I don't like this weirdness. I'll just reposition that so it's about there. Move this down. Select the next keyframe. Hold Option. Move this up. That might give us a slightly smoother animation. Yeah, more of like a realistic turn that the taxi's making across that spot. So again, I'm being very specific at the end here, but you can see how doing that kind of work is very powerful and very specific, but that's what you get into with motion graphics. So now we can see our taxi's following that line as it goes through the path around the turn, and then we end up getting to the Magic Castle at the end of it. So that's how you can create an animated map using motion and just doing it right in there. With keyframes, we looked at behaviors, filters, making a mask, drawing a shape where we did the line and the actual path. We looked at some of the tools. We looked at animation and hitting A so that you disable record animation so you don't add any accidental keyframes. And essentially, we've created our effect here. So if we're ready to take this back to Final Cut, you can go up to the top right, hit the share button, similar to Final Cut, and you have an option to export that movie right on out. When you export the movie, you would save it into hopefully a folder for all of your content that you're using with the folder. Maybe do same as source for the export quality so you get the best quality out and into Final Cut. And you don't have to open it with QuickTime. You can say none for that. We have no audio in this project, so I could choose video only. And if we click on summary, we get an idea of the project that's going to be created there. So that's all you'd have to do. Hit next. You can save it on the desktop or wherever you want. Because these are graphics, you might want to add a version number into the name. Hit return, and you'll go and save that onto the desktop, and then we can import that right into Final Cut. Whew. So that was about 20 minutes or so, but that's how you can create an animated map using motion. You might be able to get away with this inside of Final Cut. However, motion is just extremely powerful. We just looked at just the kind of surface of what you can create. This might be about the extent of what you can create in Final Cut. And as we want to get further in, especially with masking and doing things like that, the tools inside of Motion are much more powerful. So definitely I'd recommend checking that out. If you don't own it, go to anawesomeguide.com and you can click on the Motion link that I have there to get you over to the App Store to be able to buy it. Just full disclosure, if you hit that link, I do get a little commission from that. I don't think anyone's actually done it yet, but I'm not sure how much it is, but that can help support this channel, so I would greatly appreciate that if you are considering it. If you do have other questions or things that you want to see done with Motion or Final Cut, any of these things, don't hesitate to reach out. And then we do have one last question, it looks like, in the chat here. You said adding captions to my YouTube videos, but since I added it directly, I didn't see a place to tell YouTube it was there. I'm now just tagging